Ida B, Chapter 19. Ronnie DeCooper was small and blonde and ran faster than anybody in our grade. He was almost always smiling, and if I was going to be like somebody, I suppose it would have been him. Sorry, if I was going to like somebody, I suppose it would have been him. He was real friendly, even when people were kind of rude, and he never picked on other kids, but he was bad in math. Not in adding or subtracting, but in multiplication, he pretty well stunk so much that every time he raised his hand or got called on, I just closed my eyes and waited it out because I knew it wasn't going to be right. Sometimes I'd think, man, Ronnie, you need to hang it up. But he kept on trying, and I respected him for not giving up, even though it looked like a losing battle to me. So I was supposed to sit with him during study time and show him how I'd learned the times tables. But I couldn't remember how I learned them, except that Mama and Daddy just kept saying them to me and asking me questions or making me recite them, and I kept trying, and pretty soon I knew them all. I could tell Ronnie was embarrassed that I was going to be teaching him, because the first time I came over to his desk, he just looked down at his feet. Now, I know it's hard to not do well at something, and I know it's hard to need help. So instead of not saying anything or waiting for him to say something, which would be my cold-hearted routine, I ended up saying, hi, because I felt awful seeing friendly, happy Ronnie, the fastest runner, looking so uncomfortable and feeling so bad about himself. Hi, Ronnie, I said as I sat down at the desk next to his, which was the only time I'd said hello to another kid since I started coming there weeks ago. I believe Ronnie was unaware of the greatness of my effort, though, because he just mumbled, hey, back, and was still watching his shoe. Like seeing it scrape along the floor was the most interesting thing ever. Well, if this had been big-headed Calvin Faribault, who thinks he's too fine for his own reflection, I would say he was beyond being rude. He was being beyond rude. But this was Ronnie, and he was just a good guy feeling down. My rock-hard heart swelled up a little bit, even though I didn't want it to. I talked to Ronnie real quietly so nobody could hear us and he wouldn't get any more embarrassed. Want to play a game, I asked. Want to play a game, Ronnie? He looked at me, just halfway to see if I was serious or teasing him or just plain crazy. What kind of game, he asked. A brain game, I said. It's like an obstacle course for your brain. I'm not too good at brain stuff, he mumbled, and went back to being fascinated with his shoe. Yes, you are. You just don't know it, I told him. Ronnie, do you run a lot? I run all of the time. I bet if I ran all the time, I could be as fast as you, I said. I doubt it, he said back, which got me a little peeved, but at least he was looking straight at me now, and all of his shame was gone. He was getting ready to go. Anyway, I said, because I decided to let that last bit lie. It's all about practice. We're going to have to practice for this game, and then we're going to play. And I'm going to beat the pants off you forever unless you keep practicing. If you practice, you might beat me sometimes. Do you want to play or not? Now, I knew that we were at the point where either Ronnie gets insulted, spits on my shoe, and says, forget it, or he gets fired up and says, let's go. Sorry. And I could see both ideas were going through his head at the same time. Because he was looking at my shoe and moving his mouth around like he was putting together a big goober. But he was also scraping his shoe real fast across the floor like he was getting ready to hop to it. Okay, he finally said, what are we playing for? I don't know, I answered. We could play for who gets to go first next. Nah, that's baby stuff. Let's play for quarters. Well, I liked that plan for two reasons. I liked that Ronnie was a competitor because that meant he was going to try and this whole thing wasn't going to be boring or pitiful as I thought. And I also liked it because I knew I was going to make some money. All right, I said, and I decided in my head that almost every time we played my game, I'd challenge Ronnie to a running race at the end of the day so he could win his money back. Or some of it anyway. But our races would have to be in private so nobody would think I was having any fun. Then I showed Ronnie what he had to do to practice. We started with the easiest multiplication you can do, other than 1 times anything, the 10 times tables. First, I showed him how every answer is just the number you're multiplying the 10 by with a 0 after it. Then I made him write out the 10 times table a bunch of times, and I did it with him so he didn't feel lonely. We had to say the 10 times tables over and over again, backward too. Then we quizzed each other with just the basics. What's 2 times 10, Ronnie? 20. What's 8 times 10, Ida? Like that till we were all warmed up. After 2 days of that, we were ready for Celebrity Challenge. For Celebrity Challenge, you can be anybody from any time, even from stories if you want. Ronnie wanted to be Carl Lewis, the all-around track star, and I was Queen Elizabeth I because she had red hair and she was Queen of England without a king or prince or anything. For this particular game, the first person to get 25 right wins. In the first round, you ask each other just the basic times tables questions. But you can switch stuff around a little. You can ask, what is 12 times 10? But you can also ask, what is 10 times 12? In the second round, you can add or subtract a multiple too, like, what is 10 times 10 minus 2 times 10? If you need a sudden death tiebreaker, you can be very complicated, but you have to be fair. You're not supposed to use paper, but I let Ronnie use it the first couple of times, and I did beat the pants off him, too, a lot. But over time, I could tell he was practicing at home because he was getting better and trickier. Sometimes he'd want to play even when we weren't in study time, like when we were lining up to go outside. And he thought he'd come up with a particularly sly question. Hey, Ida, he'd say, a quarter for one question. Just one question for a whole quarter. Come on. But most times, I wouldn't even talk back to him because I didn't want other kids thinking I was hanging around with anybody. The only way Ronnie could beat me was if he went first, and every once in a great while, he did it. But I never beat him at running, even though I got closer, so it was fair. I'd race him at the end of the day while everybody was waiting for their buses, if nobody was paying any attention. We'd sneak out behind the school and run from the first yellow line on the playground to the back fence. Then I'd give him a quarter, and we'd walk back to our buses acting like we didn't know each other at all. And I almost had fun with Ronnie, but I'd never tell myself he was my friend because I met him at Ernest B. Lawson Elementary School.